7:10 is the time. Welcome back. Certain apartment complexes in the East Valley are trying to crack down on crime, and they're asking prospective tenants to agree to a criminal background check. Joining us this morning to talk about the controversial program that's in place is Officer Tim Zehring from the Mesa Police Department. Good morning, and thank you for coming down.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So, first of all, how does this work? The landlord does the background check?
The Mesa Police Department started the crime-free multi-housing program about 2.5 years ago. We don't mandate that anybody does a criminal background check, but it is up to the property manager if they want to. Through local credit reporting agencies, they can not only get the credit history on a person, but also conviction histories for violent crimes, rape, child molestation, homicide, things to that effect.
So minor crimes wouldn't show up?
In most cases they don't. There's a possibility an auto theft could show, or other serious charges, possibly, I don't want to say white-collar crimes, but more severe property crimes could show, armed robbery, things to that effect, that would tend to show that the applicant has a tendency towards violent crime.
And it has to be a conviction, not just an arrest?
Absolutely. That's one of the controversial issues that's been brought up, that a person could be excluded from residency in a property if it was suspected that they had done a crime. Absolutely not true. Purely only on conviction.
And would this include convictions anywhere in the U.S., or only in Arizona, or only in Maricopa County?
Different credit reporting agencies have got better investigative background leads than others. Some of them do check county courthouses across the nation and build a national database. Some of them can only check the county in which you reside. So it really depends on the company that's doing the check.
Now, there are a couple hundred apartment complexes that are participating in this. Where are most of them located?
I would say there's quite a few hundred all across the valley. The crime-free multi-housing program is also in 16 states and Canada. So the major concentration would be right now California, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, as well as here in Arizona.
And one of the controversial aspects of this is that it puts the property manager or the landlord almost in a law enforcement position, doesn't it?
That's the misnomer, maybe. It's a misconception of the program. The reason I bring that up is all across the nation, property managers are getting sued because they allowed a violent criminal on the property, and they're getting sued for millions of dollars. I feel that if we're going to give the property manager the responsibility and the accountability of keeping crime off the property, we have to give them the authority to keep the dangerous criminal out. And what they're doing is basically self-defense. You know, they're saying we have to protect ourselves and protect our tenants, so we have no choice but to keep the violent criminals out.
Are they obligated to keep the information they find confidential?
I would say, I don't know if there's an obligation there, but there could certainly be civil implications if they release that information to other people. The property manager, I'm not sure, is bound by any privacy laws, whereas a government agency we would be, but I don't think it would be in their best interest to advertise to other people that somebody who applied for an apartment was turned down for that reason.
It may be hard to have sympathy for convicted rapists or other offenders, but what about the notion that they've paid their debt to society? Don't they get to start back at square one like the rest of us if they've served their time?
Excellent point. Absolutely. And we agree with that. In fact, we tell property managers it's probably not a good idea to hold somebody accountable for a crime that occurred more than 5 years ago. But most importantly, again, the issue, if a person goes to a property manager and he promises he won't be involved in illegal activity, there's a potential there he may not be telling the truth. If a property manager says, okay, I believe you that you won't do a crime, but in fact that person does molest a child in the swimming pool or does rape a woman in a common area, that manager is still liable for millions of dollars.
Now, if I go to one of these apartment complexes and I want to move in and they say, here, fill out this form, and I say, no, I'm not going to be subject to this because I have a right to privacy, are they likely to tell me I can't rent an apartment there? The
police department does not mandate that they must do a criminal background check. It's purely up to each manager whether or not they choose to do that. We don't want to tell them how to run the business, but it is possible that you could go to an apartment complex in this program and they will say it is a policy of this management company that unless you willingly sign this release, you will not be welcome. And if I could, I'd like to mention in some cities like in Ohio, Cincinnati, Cleveland, they're even starting some things now where you have to pass a urinalysis before they'll let you in. So it's certainly much heavier than the requirements we have. Also, in many cities up in Minnesota where we're starting the program, you go to your local police department, you pay to have your own criminal history performed by the police department, and then you take that to the apartment manager. And unless you do, you're not considered for residency.
Okay, and quickly, you say this is working. It's cutting down on crime in these complexes?
Absolutely. The first year in Mesa, we had a 67% reduction in police calls for service in our worst properties. Even in our best properties, we had a 13% decrease. And throughout the valley, we've seen the same, with some west cities here having an 84% reduction, 78% reduction in police calls.
All right, Officer Zehring, thank you very much for coming down this morning.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you.
Hard at work up there tonight. Your credit report may be giving away more than your bad debts. Bennett Cunningham's here tonight to tell us about landlords and how they can get a hold of your criminal history as well through the credit report.
Cameron, renting an apartment will never, ever be the same. Landlords want to create a safe haven for their tenants by digging into their past, and if you have any criminal history at all, they may not rent you an apartment. The same list that holds your bad debts now lists your debts to society, and some landlords are using that information to weed out unwanted tenants. Do you ever feel like you owe it to give somebody a second chance?
No.
Why not?
Because that's the way we're keeping this property safe.
Credit Data Southwest says it is the only bureau in Arizona that compiles this kind of criminal information. When this message, General Statement 20, pops up on a credit report, it means a felony has been committed. A landlord can then call and find out details of the crime and decide whether or not to rent to that person. That does not sit well with the American Civil Liberties Union.
What we're doing is we're stigmatizing and literally criminalizing a person for the rest of their lives and saying we're not going to let you in this neighborhood.
The whole idea of doing background checks was spearheaded by the crime-free multi-housing program. Started in Mesa a few years ago, it is a coalition of landlords, tenants, and police, they say, to keep rental property safe.
And in West Valley cities, we've already shown in the first year an 84% reduction in police calls for service and a 78% reduction in police calls for service in the worst properties.
But regardless of the effect, the ACLU points out the result may be unfair.
The old idea that if you do the crime and you serve the time, you should get a second chance, you should be able to start over, is being lost in all this.
Fair housing laws say you may not discriminate against race, religion, national origin, physical handicap, familial status, etc. There are no restrictions on turning down somebody with a criminal history.
More than 90% of crimes at apartment complexes are committed not by residents, Cameron, but by strangers. Still, if they can stop one potential crime from happening, then they say it's all worth it.
I guess there's a question about the accuracy of all of this.
Yeah, the data company that we went to says it's accurate. They send court runners down to court every day to look it up. And, you know, there were problems with my credit report also. You never know, but they say it's pretty good.
Okay.